It was 2012, and my best friend Hannah had convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. She had, after searching for the longest time, found her dream car and was planning on traveling the 900 kilometers to the very north of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand two-door Suzuki Vitara in a purplish kind of color, and I must admit, I didn't share her obsession with it. But with her being the closest thing to a sister that I would ever get, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I have always had each other, from the cradle and onwards, sharing each other's love for adventure. We have traveled the world together. At the time this happened, we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip in Asia. The man who was selling her the car had agreed to meet us at a small airport in Umeå. When we arrived shortly before lunchtime, it had started to snow heavily, the first snow of the season no less. The parking lot was almost empty, and when I saw the man standing outside the Vitara, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter. A lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle with hunting and fishing, so there wasn't much off about this, but still, there was something about him that made me uneasy. He was nice though, smiling and waving to us, shaking hands with both of us before walking us around the car and pointing out all the tiny little flaws. He also showed us the work he had done to the car and showed the paperwork from the recently done engine repairs. He made the impression that he didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he made a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snowing had now intensified, and we were getting extremely cold. He opened the car door for us and said,
"I got the paperwork at home. Let's close a deal over some coffee."
Against all my instincts, I climbed in after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. I had no reason to feel threatened by this man who had been nothing but pleasant to us, other than the alarm bells ringing off inside my head. I couldn't tell what it was that was making me feel this way, but there must have been some signs that something was wrong, something that my subconscious tuned into. The man was constantly talking. Funny, since people from the north of Scandinavia are famous for never speaking a word more than absolutely necessary. He showed the stereo, told us about the features of the car, about the places we drove past, about the wildlife and the nature. There was never a silent moment. After about 20 minutes, I started to notice that we were in no way moving in the direction of civilization. Instead, it seemed that we were moving further and further into the vast wilderness. It struck me that he had us in the back of a two-door car, driving us into unknown territory, and no one knew where we were. I then looked at Hannah, who had happily been listening to the man telling stories about the area, and I noticed that she didn't look worried at all. Maybe I was just overreacting. We drove past a group of people standing by the side of the road, hunters planning their day or taking a break maybe. This truly was a different Sweden compared to the city. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no neighboring houses, apart from a small cabin that we drove past a few hundred meters down the road. But even that looked to be empty. We followed the man inside. He was still talking non-stop, and continued to do so until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking things about the car, and I could sense that her voice had a new undertone now, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she too had started to feel that something was not right.
"I'll put the kettle on,"
he said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair, and he smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely, and made my way to the door with a little red heart on. I was washing my hands when I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror. Something was hidden behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled up plastic folder, and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. It was very violent porn pictures that looked to have been cut from a magazine. They looked to have been glued to the paper, surrounded by cutout pieces of handwritten text. Put together, it made a horrifying story about how a woman was lured into a car with a promise of getting to buy the car cheaply, and that it quickly turned into a horror story. I know this will sound silly, but when we traveled together, Hannah and I had a code word for whenever we felt it was time to get out of a situation. We never needed to use it until now. We just joked about it, but this is when it came in handy. I walked out of the bathroom and looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes, we forgot to buy potatoes. And that's too bad because, good God, we need some." The look on my face must have told her about the situation and how it was no joke, and she said, "Oh, we should get some as soon as possible." "The sooner the better," I replied. Hannah, always pretty and charming and capable of great acting, casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, tapped his shoulder and said, "Excuse me, but I was wondering if I can go have a quick look at the cam belt." He huffed something about it being in good shape and handed over the keys. We got into the car and sped off faster than the weather strictly speaking allowed. We left the car at the airport and hoped we hadn't made a terrible mistake. What if he reported it stolen? It would be embarrassing to explain to the police, but nothing like that happened. He didn't follow us. He didn't report it in. We had to take the train since we had no plane tickets. The original plan had been to take the car home, but we didn't want to linger close to the airport in case he came looking for us. Later, Hannah asked what made me use the code word, and I told her about what I had found. It might have just been a fantasy, a sick game, and maybe he would have never done anything to us, but right then and there, I was convinced that we would die if we didn't get out. Thank God Hannah didn't need any convincing or proof, just the code word. I truly think that if we hadn't talked about it so many times, Okay, so for a bit of background, I was about 9 at the time and was very naive. I was visiting my cousins who used to live in a small town with mostly farms and suburbs. We were all bored and decided to walk to a park about a mile away and play baseball. It was me, my older sister, my 5 guy cousins, and some of their friends. There were about 10 of us walking through the suburbs, so nothing too dangerous. We get to the park and we play for about half an hour when I decide I want to go back. No one else wanted to do so I just went by myself. I knew my way back and it was just suburbs, so I thought it would be fine. While I was walking back across the street, where I was walking, an old man was lying on what I think was his lawn. He was pretending to be injured and kept asking for someone to come help him. This man was in his mid-60s and looked like he really needed help. So I went over, but still kept my distance, about 5 feet. The man kept saying something that I couldn't understand, so I had to keep getting closer. Once I was right next to him, he suddenly shot up and grabbed my arm. I began screaming and thrashing as he tried to drag me into a nearby van. I tried to do everything in my power to get away from him. Apparently I screamed so loud that neighbors came outside. Once the man saw that there were people outside, he let go of me and got in the van and drove away. I didn't speak to anyone. I just ran back as fast as I could. When I got back, I sat outside of my house and calmed down for a while. I didn't tell my mother because I didn't want me or my cousins to get in trouble, which was an incredibly stupid thing to do. The story's not over yet though. I came back the following year and we were watching the news. They were talking about a man who was acting in need of help. Once his victims were close enough, he would grab them, shove them in a van, and then rape them. This sounded eerily familiar to the events that happened to me in the previous year. Then the old man's mugshot appeared on the screen. I was terrified, but I still didn't do anything. I still think about what could have happened if I didn't shout loud enough, or if I froze in terror. In August, I moved into my first apartment. I had just graduated from university and was offered a job as a teacher, and was well on my way to figuring out this whole adult life. I moved in with a longtime friend, and neither of us had any complaints about our apartment complex. The complex is well maintained, clean, and the other members have been nothing but friendly. To get into our complex, there are 2 gates. If you live at the apartments, you're given a remote that opens the gate of your choosing. But if you don't live at the complex, you have to go through a directory at the front to find a name of the resident you are looking for. Once you have found the resident's name, it appears as the last name, first initial. It calls the resident's phone and gives the resident a few options. The resident can choose to talk to the person who has called them and decide to let them in by entering their key code into the dial pad. Or they can hang up and the gates won't be opened. Overall, I think this system helped to save me from the situation I had gotten myself into. One night in October, I was driving home from my fiance's house. It was late at night, probably close to 2 a.m. I had just gotten off the freeway and was about to enter into my neighborhood when I was stopped at a traffic light. I was in the left-hand turn lane, and there was one other car in the right-hand turn lane, 2 lanes away from me. The light changed to a green arrow, and I proceeded to turn left, and the car, which had previously been in the right-hand lane, maneuvered to follow me. I thought this was a bit weird because of how many lanes they cut across, but I figured they were just lost, so I tried not to think too much about it. I continued driving down the road and was about to make a right-hand turn into my neighborhood, and was distressed to see that the car was still behind me. Against my better judgment, I ignored my gut feeling and figured that they just lived in the neighborhood around my complex. I remember thinking that they were driving just a little bit too close, but again, I tried not to let my anxiety get the best of me. I remember reading from stories on here that the best way to tell if someone is following you is by turning right multiple times to form a square of sorts. I talked myself out of this maneuver, however. I wish I hadn't. I just sped up a bit, clicked my gate open, and pulled into the complex. The car following me whipped in right behind me. Again, I convinced myself that this was normal. They probably lived in the complex too, right? The gate opens up on the opposite side of the apartments, so you have to drive through the entire complex to get to where my apartment was. I drove through quickly. I was prepared to exit the complex just in case the person was still following me. But when I looked at the straightaway right behind me, I realized that there weren't any headlights following anymore. I laughed at myself for being so nervous and pulled into my parking spot in front of my building. As I parked and prepared to get out of my car, I turned for one last look and realized that the car that had been following me had reappeared with their headlights off, and they parked in an unreserved spot just a bit down from my own. I knew that I should have turned my car back on and just drove away. I knew that there were so many other things that I should have done, but in a moment of panic, I jumped out of my car and ran up the stairs and into my apartment. I double-locked the doors, grabbed a knife, and ran into my room to call my fiancée. That's when I began hearing shouting from outside, but I refused to listen to what they were saying as I told my fiancée what had just happened. I suddenly heard more voices shouting, and then it was silent. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I remember not being able to stand because my knees were shaking so much. I tried to stop myself from crying so I would be able to see if someone broke down my door. My fiancé made it to my apartments in record time with a baseball bat. This helped ease my mind. He stayed that night and let me sleep with the lights on, although I couldn't get the sound of screaming out of my head. It was obvious that they were calling for someone, and I figured it must have been me. I assumed the other person screaming must have been another resident who was trying to make them be quiet, seeing as it was the early morning hours. I figured the whole situation was over until I woke up in the morning. When I walked downstairs to my car, I discovered that one of the tires had been viciously slashed to ribbons. I then realized that I'd left some mail with my name on it in my car. I didn't think much of this detail until later. I got my tire fixed and tried to push that night out of my mind. A few days later, however, I started to receive calls from the directory in front of my building to let someone in. I honestly wasn't expecting anyone, so I answered and asked who was calling for me. I was met with silence, so I hung up and didn't grant access to the complex. Later on, I was called again, and the same procedure was repeated, but again, there was no answer. This went on for days. They called obsessively from the call box directory for days. Eventually, I snapped on the phone for them to tell me who they were, and a man answered. He told me that he lived in the complex and needed to be let in because he lost his keys. He then told me that he lived in the apartment next to me. I knew the family who lived next to me. It was a woman with 4 children, but no man. And if he really did live there and lost his keys, he wouldn't have been able to call himself to open the gate. I told him that I didn't believe him and hung up just as he started screaming at me to let him in. The calls continued. Finally, I had had enough. I marched to the office the next day and asked them to take my number off the directory. This way, the man was unable to call me now, and I could feel at peace. I warned the office about the man who had damaged my car, and they increased security rounds in the complex for a few months. As anticlimactic as it is, that was the last contact I had with that weirdo, thankfully. I know I had wrongfully handled the situation by not listening to my gut when it told me that this was trouble. I allowed someone to follow me, learn my name, and they were able to torment me for weeks before I finally took action. I'm just thankful to my fiancé and the staff at my apartment for helping me to stop this creep from contacting me. So before I begin, perhaps a bit of background information would help you understand my story. I'm now a 20-year-old male living in the Netherlands, and I've been a geek all of my life. Games in particular have always played a major role in my life. Starting when I got my first PlayStation when I was 5 years old, something about gaming just always got me. Be it mechanically or in terms of storytelling, I could always find something to love about it. As I grew older, I got more and more into RPGs and eventually found my way onto World of Warcraft. As I got more involved into the game, I started joining raiding guilds. For those of you who don't know, it's basically a group of players who are intent on facing the game's hardest content as a team. The second guild I had joined was the greatest bloody team of people I had met thus far. One of these people was a Swedish girl who was around my age called Maggie. We got along quite nicely, as it turned out her mom, who was also in this guild, was actually living in the Netherlands. So often, we'd end up in conversations where she asked me to teach her some Dutch, and she'd teach me some Swedish in return. It was all good fun. Fast forward to the beginning of 2013. The aforementioned guild had fallen apart a while back, and I had joined a new one. I had stayed in touch with some people from the old guild, but Maggie really hadn't been online all that much. When she did get back online, we quickly caught up, and it turned out she actually moved in with her mother and had spent the last couple of months improving her Dutch and attending high school. She also started dating this guy named William. He was actually part of the same guild I had met Maggie in. He always struck me as a nice guy. Other guild members always thought he was a bit direct and perhaps rude, but being Dutch, I understood that's just simply how our culture works, so I was always okay with it. June comes around. Me and Maggie recently finished our final exams, and we were waiting for the results to come back in. One afternoon while we were playing online, I suggested a meetup between the two of us. I really didn't have much to do, and given that she had voiced her concerns about finding her footing in Dutch social circles, I figured this was a nice opportunity to take her first baby steps into the country. She excitedly agreed and asked if she could bring William as well. Obviously I said yes, seeing as he was her boyfriend. Meetups are safer when you arrive as a couple, and meeting former guild members was something I was looking forward to anyway. A couple of days later, I met both of them in Rotterdam, and personally, I had a really great day. I showed them around the city since I knew it best, had some conversations, a few laughs, and we ended the day by taking a trip to the Euromast. Before leaving, Maggie had to go to the bathroom, so me and William were waiting outside, striking conversation. I said to him, "You two make a nice couple." "Thanks," he replied. "I freaking love her, you know." Honestly, I wouldn't know what I'd do without her at this stage. Back then, I didn't think much of this statement. It's just a good thing people say when they're in love, so kudos to him, right? Maggie got out of the restroom, we said our goodbyes, and we parted ways. A few weeks later, we got our exam scores back. I had passed high school with flying colors, but Maggie wasn't so lucky. She had failed most of her exams. She told me she was going to be studying for the rest of the summer in order to properly prepare for her rerun of the last year of high school. Even as I was heading to college, she was very thankful and assured me that she'd let me know if she needed any help. Fast forward again to September. After our last conversation, Maggie had practically disappeared off the internet. She hadn't logged into the World of Warcraft. She was never on Skype and wasn't even online on Facebook anymore. I had asked William in mid-August how she was doing, and he assured me that she was fine, so I thought nothing of it. I even admired her focus on her education. However, during my second week in college, all of that changed. I got into the metro and picked up a free newspaper in the seat next to me to pass the time. I vividly remember turning the fourth page to read a headline saying, "Swedish woman age 19 stabbed in her own backyard." It took me a few seconds to even realize that she lived in that city now, and that she was 19. Even though the article didn't mention a name, I grew very concerned and quickly sent her a message, asking if she was okay. The rest of the day went by, and I had heard nothing from Maggie. I eventually figured that if anything had happened to her, people would most likely start posting things on her Facebook page. Concerned and scared of what I was going to find, I started typing her name into the search bar of Facebook. Sure enough, it was already filling up with the messages from people who had heard that she had passed away from her injuries. After inquiring with some other former guild members, I learned that William had stabbed her. She had broken up with him after she had received her horrendous test results back, and he wasn't at all too pleased with this. In the aftermath of the incident, me and some other Dutch guild members went to her city to meet up with her friends from school. We attended the memorial set up in her school and put some flowers at the scene of the crime on behalf of everyone she had played the game with. When we went to meet up with Maggie's school friends, We found out that William hadn't been half as nice as we were led to believe. During the relationship, he had been very controlling of Maggie, and after the breakup, he began stalking her and sending her threatening text messages. She even went to the police to report it, but they told her that they couldn't do anything for her at that stage. After that, she met a different guy and began dating him. William found out and, well, took matters into his own hands. Thinking back at this, the worst part of all of it had just come to my mind. When we put the flowers at the scene of the crime, we stood around for a few minutes, contemplating whether or not we should knock on the door and personally give her mother our condolences. Given that we kind of knew her as well, we decided against it, given that we might unintentionally remind her mother that Maggie's online connections ultimately cost her her life. As soon as we got back to the car, we saw Maggie's front door open. Out of the door came her mother with Maggie's younger sister. I knew at the time that Maggie had a younger sister, but I didn't know that she was only 6 or 7. I fucking lost it when I saw her little head hanging while grabbing hold of her mother, scared to go around the corner to face all the drawings and flowers people had left there. In writing this post, I found a very recent article that said William is most likely going to go to prison for 20 years. Honestly, I fucking hope you never make it out of there. I work at a grocery store pulling carts and bagging things. It's a shitty job, but it pays the rent. I'm 20 years old and female. I've posted about strange customers before, but this guy, he's a repeat offender. This has been going on for about 6 months. It was about 6 months ago that I was standing in the liquor section, which those who were under 21 usually weren't allowed to go into, unless they're working, which I was. I was dusting the bottles and making sure that the display looked nice. A man, about 10 or so years older than me, entered the section and asked me to recommend him something. I answer and tell him that I'm only about 20 and therefore know nothing about alcohol. Yes, I've had it before, but I know jack shit about what's good and what isn't. He then frowned when I told him that.
You sure you're not 21?
He asked. I said, yeah, I'm sure.
That's a shame.
He says,
I could show you a good time if you were old enough.
He then winked at me. I just kinda laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Then I pretend someone needs me over in another section and scurry off. I brushed it off, thinking that this would be the last time I ever heard from him. 2 months later, I'm picking up the slack for my sick coworker and stocking the shelves in his absence. It's about 10 at night, and the store is dead quiet. I normally like these times because it gives me time to myself. I was rearranging some cereal boxes to look nice when someone taps me on the shoulder. I jump and turn around, and I see that it was the same guy. Generally, it's kind of a faux pas to touch random retail workers you don't know, but this guy didn't have a care in the world about that.
Are you 21 yet?
He asked. I shook my head no, remembering where I'd seen him before. I warily asked him if he needs help finding anything.
No.
He said.
I just wanted to know if you were 21 yet.
He then turned and walked off without another word, or without grabbing any merch from the shelves. He might have bought something later from another aisle, but I sure as hell didn't stick around to find out. 3 weeks later, I'm bagging in one of the check stands when he comes through, again, posing the same question. I once again answer no, and since there's a lot of people around, that was the end of that. And now, last week, I'm marking down a service walk at about 7 in the morning. Basically, That means I walked to the store and made sure that there were no messes or safety issues. I'm at the customer service desk alone, and my back is turned. I hear someone clearing their throat, and I turn around. Guess who?
Are you 21 yet?
He asked. He was staring intently at me this time, like he was trying to will me to suddenly be 21. I once again answered no, and he scowled at me.
Are you sure?
He asked again. Oh yes, I'm quite sure, thank you very much, I said to him. Thankfully after this, my manager swooped in to take care of what he needed, which was a lotto ticket, and I got the fuck out of Dodge. I've told my managers about this dude, and they don't seem to really care. For now, he hasn't done anything except creep hardcore. But I worry.